First, have a look. Ancient Egypt was not the oldest river valley civilization, the second oldest, but it was incredibly long-lasting and, frankly, just kind of really cool to learn about in terms of a distinctive civilization with a really intricate and detailed religious belief system that politics, that they made amazing art and architecture for it, and we found a lot of it. So that's where we are starting our lesson today, in the Nile River Valley. So given the definition of Egypt, let me see in the chat. You can respond in pictures or school-appropriate GIFs or in words if you want. Given what we learned about civilization last week and that Egypt is a civilization, what are the traits of civilization that we can expect to find in Egypt? So in order to answer this question, you could look at your notes from Friday and list the traits of civilization. You can think also, without having to look at your notes, about effects of the Neolithic Revolution. And we've got some on the board already. In the chat, we've got system of government and religion, true, true. Social hierarchy, true. Government, true. Writing, absolutely. What else? Where do we think Egyptians get their food? Do they hunt and gather? Agriculture, great job, Edward. And Caesar, great, rivers. Those two work together, right? We expect to see a big river for irrigating agriculture. That'll do it. That's great. I feel good about these answers. All right, so think back to our lesson on, thank you for the illustration, Alejandro, perfect. Think back to our lesson on world regions when we showed you all of those different maps. Remember that Africa is divided into two regions, and those regions are based partly on history and culture, but partly on physical geography. So thinking about where Egypt is, can you name the region and the giant landmark in physical geography that kind of surrounds it? And the river, if you're feeling happy. Okay, so Caesar says North Africa and the Nile River, absolutely. It is in North Africa, which is near the Middle East. David, I think that's where you were going for. The Middle East is right next door. So North Africa, the Nile River. So aside from the Nile River, do we remember, we didn't really linger on it, but there's like a pretty big landmark that like takes up all of North Africa that's like really, really, really hard to cross. You might not know the exact name of it, but you can tell me what it is. A desert. Perfect, Caesar. Desert. So Egypt is located in North Africa, very close to the Middle East, along the Nile River, surrounded by the Sahara Desert. Perfect. All right, the thing about Egypt, this is a critical thinking question. I don't know if you can answer it, but we can try. It was incredibly stable. Like it lasted thousands and thousands of years. The United States has been around for 244 years, for context. Egypt, almost 3,000. So can anyone like predict what you would expect to see in a state that was stable enough to last for like thousands of years? It's a very vague question, and I don't know that you guys can answer it, so you're just like answering to see if I'm curious, you know. So a government, totally, probably a strong one. Good job, Isabella. And big monuments, absolutely, Caesar, for a couple of reasons, like they have the time to build them, and government strong enough to direct those projects, and advanced technology for the time. Y'all are thinking like historians already. I'm pretty proud of y'all. Good job. All right, so let's get started. See how right you guys are. We're going to start with prior knowledge. There's stuff that we have learned about in the past that will be useful for this lesson. Your PS plus for your note. Oh no, sorry, Alejandro. All right, so for context, we have to remember that topographical features, like the stuff on top of Earth, like rivers, mountains, valleys, deserts, they can make communication between societies easier, like rivers, or they can make it harder, like deserts. And we need to remember the way that we use the word state in social studies classes. When we say state, we're not talking about like Texas or Missouri or Montana. In social studies classes, a state is a territory ruled over by a government with like borders that are legally defined. In everyday language, states are called countries, and states can look very different. You could have a single ruler under one leader in a specific city. Those are called city-states. You could have kings, democratic nations, or you can have like civilizations that conquer other civilizations to become an empire. And we have to remember that social hierarchy back in the day, and now really, but like really, really back in the day, was thought to be key to keeping an orderly, secure, stable civilization. And at the bottom, we've got a little timeline, right? So like we started tracing the origins of humanity with the first human migrations around 50,000 BCE, coming up to the Neolithic Revolution around 10,000 BCE. Thousands of years pass again, and we have the very first river valley civilizations, starting in Mesopotamia, then Egypt, and then around the year 3000, we have writing invented. And writing leads to history, right? Before writing, it was prehistory. So here's the big question with Egypt. Ancient Egyptian civilization, and like really linger here on how long of a time period this is. It lasted from 3000 BCE roughly to 332 BCE roughly. It's thousands of years. And again, for context, the US has been around for 220 some years. This is thousands. So like how did such an ancient civilization last so long? And how did geography help? Because it was a huge help. To put time in context, every time we talk about big numbers, it helps to like attach those numbers to tangible specific things because it's really hard to get your heads around them. So Cleopatra, real person, she lived closer in time to the building of the first Pizza Hut than to the building of the pyramids. So she's closer to us than to the pyramids that you see at the very bottom of the slide, which is crazy. So our big question today is how, or why, or whatever. I'll add some context. This is not key points, so you don't have to write any of this down, but just think about how this might help us answer a question. A big answer to how Egypt lasted so long has to do with the Nile River. And the cool thing about these ancient river valley civilizations, if you really start studying them in depth, is to see how these rivers shaped not just the lives of people in terms of how they got their food, but their worldviews, how they saw the world. The thing that was great about the Nile was that it was stable and predictable. It was regular. It flooded like you could set a clock to it if clocks had been invented, but of course they hadn't. It flooded on a schedule. You could plan around it. It was navigable, so you could like use it for transportation safely. And it was benign. It didn't flood violently and unpredictably, as was the case in Mesopotamia, which we'll see tomorrow. So the Nile River made Egypt one of the safest and richest in terms of food places in the world. Every summer, the river would flood at exactly the right time, leaving behind nutrient-rich silt for planting season. And planting was so easy in Egypt that Egyptians just like tossed seeds on the floor, like, you know, where the rivers had flooded, but still. And then they'd let their livestock walk all over them to push them into the ground. And then stuff would bloom, like grains, figs, wheat, pomegranates, melons, all kinds of things. So that was useful. It led to a huge surplus in food. And because it was easy to navigate, it was possible to get resources from downstream the Nile, like timber, so like wood and gold. So because it was chill and predictable, Egyptians could get gigantic food surpluses with relatively little effort, which allowed them to devote a ton in time and energy to a ton of really impressive projects. So on this slide, we've got our key points. So key points are the part of the lesson that you do need to write down. So please title this part Ancient Egypt, and let's capture the most information. As you guys have questions too, if you could post them in the chat so I can answer them afterwards if I know the answers. All right, so our name of this civilization is Ancient Egypt. We are going to be learning about a couple of River Valley civilizations and comparing and contrasting them. So this is going to be useful to record. And like I said, ancient Egypt lasted from 3000 BCE to 332 BCE. In this class, you do not have to memorize dates. What I do want you to do is look at that time period and be like, whoa, that was a really long time, because it was. It is located in modern-day Egypt, which is pretty easy, in North Africa, along the banks of the Nile River, and surrounded by the Sahara Desert, as you guys noted in the Do First. Egypt is a fascinating civilization to study, and it lasted thousands of years, so there's really a lot to dig into. For the purposes of this week, we're going to think about how Egypt created a civilization stable enough, with a state that was strong enough to last for as long as it did. A big part of the answer to that question has to do with the river, right? The Nile River granted Egyptians the sanity that comes with a calendar. I think like right now in the age of COVID, right, where we're all trying to like live our lives in the midst of a pandemic that makes it hard to plan, I think we can appreciate how useful it is to be able to plan into the future pretty far with a predictable calendar, right? Because of the predictable flooding, Egyptians had easy crop irrigation. So it was pretty easy to get water to their plants to grow to eat. And that led to them having really big food surplus. And what we know about food surplus from a couple days ago, remember, is that it allows for specialization. If you have enough food to feed everybody in the community and then you have a surplus, so like extra, you can spare some people in the community to develop specialized skills. And from all of those different specialized skills come all of the distinctive, like unique aspects of civilization. Nearby geography gave Egypt, a second gift, and that was protection. Egypt had natural barriers. It had a desert surrounding it. Deserts are really hard to cross. And the Sahara Desert then protected Egypt from attack. Not always, but often. So, protection from the desert, plus the Nile River making a huge food surplus possible, led to Egypt developing into an incredibly stable, incredibly strong state. Like all ancient civilizations, hierarchy was thought to be the key to social order. If you have everybody in society knowing their role in the community, not just their place in terms of power, but like what they're supposed to do, you can organize society pretty efficiently. And the Egyptian social hierarchy was much like every other one that we're going to learn about, right? At the top, you had state power, so like government power, a king, a ruler, and religion. Religion made state power valid. It legitimized state power. So in Egypt, that would be the pharaoh and the priests at the top of the social hierarchy. In the middle, like in every river valley civilization, you had a middle, it's not like a middle class in the way that we use it now, but like intermediate level of power and wealth and prestige went to the elites, the people who like were upper class, shaped rules. The bureaucrats, from the French word bureau for desk, which means a person who works to do the business of government without themselves having any power to make decisions, like the person at the driver's license office who gives you your driver's license. And you'd have specialized classes in the middle. So like people who knew how to fight, people who studied their religion and became priests, people who could write, scribes, people who made weapons, artisans, all those people in the middle. And then at the bottom, you had masses of slaves and peasants, agricultural workers, and servants. This isn't unique to Egypt. This is pretty common. But what Egypt did with it is pretty phenomenal. So a characteristic of civilization that we can see in Egypt is monumental architecture, big buildings that showcased the power of the state. And in Egypt, like this is clearly seen in the pyramids, right? If you see a gigantic pyramid, I mean, even now we have people like so in awe with these buildings that they make absurd TV shows and decided that it had to be aliens that did it because humans couldn't have. Well, actually humans did. And it is amazing. And don't watch Ancient Aliens because it's conspiracy theory trash. People did this. And we can be amazed at the early state that managed to make this happen in a way that still blows our minds and leads to conspiracy theories, which are trash. All right, so we went over this last Friday. I'm not going to go over every single piece again, but do remember that the social hierarchy really, really, really matters for these ancient civilizations. And that at the very top, you always had rulers and religion kind of hand in hand. For Egypt, we had the rulers of ancient Egypt called pharaohs, who made the laws. And then you've got a lot more detail on this slide that you guys will be going over in your classwork. So that said, we've got some questions. I'll put back the key points so that you guys can copy those down while we go over these questions. The first was, what was the currency in Egypt? That is a great question. I don't know, but we're about to find out. The currency, like money, like paper money is a pretty recent invention, historically speaking. Before, people used to like attach value to precious objects that are limited in quantity, like gold. But I'm not going to say the word for the currency in ancient Egypt out loud because it sounds the past tense of a bad word, but I will paste it in the chat. The currency in ancient Egypt was linked to the value of gold, is the short answer to your question.